Everyone will agree that exploitation of people, animals, and the environment is wrong. So why does it happen? Why do people exploit others when they don't like being exploited themselves? In this video, we turn to the late philosopher and mystic Sri Prabhat Ranjan Sarkar for his thoughts on the question, what motivates people to exploit others? What is the psychology behind exploitation? And most importantly, do I exploit others? At the simplest level, people exploit others because they have little control over their base instincts, such as greed, lust, envy, and fear. They lack the moderating influence of a benevolent, moral, and rational intellect to discriminate right from wrong. For example, envy may motivate a person to steal a car because the conscience is not strong enough to tell them theft is wrong. But there's more to the psychology of exploitation than just lack of control over instincts. Our values and our sentiments have a major role to play. When people say they oppose exploitation, they're acknowledging certain values and fundamental rights. In Sarkar's philosophy, all living beings, humans, animals, and plants, have two kinds of value, existential and utility value. I acknowledge a person's existential value when I recognize that they also experience the pleasures and pains of life. They are searching for happiness just as I am. It is unacceptable for me to cause them harm for my own benefit. By contrast, utility value is the contribution a living being can make to the collective. It is easy to understand utility value because we can measure it. It is the economist's way of thinking about people, animals, and plants as resources. How hard can he work? How much can she donate to my cause? How much money can be made from this forest? In this video, we will briefly examine different kinds of exploitation. But they all have one thing in common. They are all the result of objectification. That is, recognizing only the utility value of a living being, of those attributes we can make use of, and not their existential value. Even the environment has existential value because it is a living entity composed of other living entities. When I objectify the environment around me, all I can see is water or food or timber to make my life comfortable. When we exploit others, we take this mode of thinking to the extreme, forgetting about the existential value of those beings around us and focusing only on their utility. As an example, the directors of a mining company may look upon the environment in terms of what profit can be extracted from the ground, caring little for the local animal and plant communities because these stand in the way of their aims. Also, the tendency to objectify is both an individual and a social phenomenon. This is important because it reveals how both personal change and political change are necessary to defeat exploitation. It is not just a political or social problem. People do not want to be exploited. Usually, physical force is required to establish and maintain a system of exploitation. Think about the Roman, Mongol, or British empires, all established and maintained by military force. More recently, the US government has used the same physical approach directly and indirectly in Latin America, Vietnam, and the Middle East. Russia and China have done the same and indeed continue to use the same imperialistic strategy of physical exploitation. Regarding imperialism, Sarkar says it has a unique psychology of exploitation. It starts with the selfish desire to acquire and control what belongs to others through suppression and subordination. Superpowers force their national interests on weaker states so they can exploit them socially, politically, and economically. Large corporations have also gained tremendous wealth. Some companies are even wealthier than whole countries. These imperialistic megacorporations routinely exploit communities and nations. Capitalism is one variety of the imperialist psychology. Capitalist mentality is all about acquiring wealth and power. Generally, this is achieved through capital speculation and through hiring the intellectual ability, physical strength, and labour of others. For the capitalist, particularly the mega-rich, everyone and everything is objectified according to their monetary worth and exploited accordingly. Even philanthropy is weaponized. Using physical or military force is expensive and not always effective. Sri Saka highlights another more insidious method of exploitation, psychic exploitation. Before planting a crop, the farmer must first prepare the ground. Similarly, before exploitation can occur, the minds of those to be exploited must be prepared. Feelings of fear or inferiority are instilled. This can be done, for example, by discouraging or forbidding the local culture, inferring their music, language and foods are inferior to the exploiter's language and culture. The exploiter then imposes his own culture or pseudo-culture onto the exploited people. This is often how indigenous people are exploited, leaving deep psychological scars which can take many generations to heal, if ever. Pseudo-culture embraces the crude, unrefined expressions of life, often, for example, objectifying people by promoting violence and pornography as entertainment. The ubiquitous so-called Western culture is a prime example, often replacing many local cultures. In fact, it's hard to find a truly local culture these days. An example of this psychic exploitation was the way the British behaved in India, by promoting English language and culture as superior. This created an inferiority complex, which then made it easy for the British to economically exploit the people, enabling Britain to send India's natural resources back to England to enjoy, at the same time pushing millions into extreme poverty and starvation. In fact, the British government followed this approach, more or less, with all its colonies. European and Asian colonial and imperial powers did the same with their respective colonies. The concept of psychic exploitation helps us to understand why patriarchy and racism have persisted for thousands of years, even into the 21st century. The difficulty of eradicating them is more due to psychological than physical factors. Deeply ingrained superiority and inferiority complexes are insidious because they render exploitation invisible. But let us now consider another important element of Saka's philosophy. Sentiments can be a feeling or emotional attachment towards certain people, places or things. Here is an important definition. A sentiment is an idea coloured by an emotion. Ideas powered by emotions are strong motivators. They also can be divisive or unifying. Likewise, emotions can be either positive or negative, for example, love or fear. Negative sentiments tend to objectify. It is through sentiments that we judge who is in the group we love and who is in the group we dislike or consider outsiders. Considering someone as outside of the group can justify exploiting them. Most social and political controversies are based on sentiment rather than rationality. For example, people's position on issues like immigration, vaccination, gay rights, abortion, or political parties. Sentiments are very powerful and can be easily manipulated. Politicians, corporations, and advertising agencies know this and use sentiments to override people's rational thinking in favour of emotional appeal or narrow agendas. Sri Saka says that there are 4 major sentiments, with the first 3 of them playing pivotal roles in the history of exploitation. They are geosentiment, socio-sentiment, human sentiment. Geosentiment is when people have a strong attachment for a particular place or geographical area. They may feel that their town or country is superior and sacred, while other places are not. For thousands of years, geosentiments have motivated imperial conquest, border disputes, and struggles to control resources. In the present day, they continue to dominate international politics and sport. An example is the struggle for the city of Jerusalem, which is sacred to 3 different groups, or the Muslim attachment to Mecca. But some sentiments serve a positive purpose, for example, buy local campaigns which strengthen local economies by limiting the leaching of wealth to major centres by big multinational corporations, or the patriotic feeling to defend one's country against an invader. When the human mind expands somewhat, they develop socio-sentiment. Here the group sentiment is not limited to a particular place, but expands to include the community. We may feel that members of our religion or race or political beliefs are all members of our in-group, but others are outside and can be exploited. Racism, sexism, classism, and xenophobia are all examples of socio-sentiment. Most social conflicts have geo-sentiment or socio-sentiment at their root. The Israeli-Palestine conflict in the Middle East is based on geo-sentiment. The Hindu-Muslim conflict in India is based on socio-sentiment around religion, while the global tensions between China and America build on socio-sentiments around belief in certain economic ideologies. Dangerous and subtle dogmas lie at the root of these conflicts. Sri Saka defines a dogma as an idea beyond which the mind is not permitted to go. Dogma flourishes in the absence of rationality and restricts our ability to think broadly and benevolently. To understand dogma, we must first understand what Saka means by rationality. Rationality is the power to think logically with a goal or purpose consistent with the long-term collective well-being. It can't be based in any selfish or narrow agenda. Any other goal is in fact considered irrational. Rationality also incorporates the ability to distinguish between right and wrong, between the moral consequence of one course of action and another. Without rationality and discrimination, we can easily accept dogma-based sentiments. Politicians and other types of leaders often promote negative sentiments which can lead to the creation of harmful dogmas. Geo and socio-sentiments can become dogmas because they establish a boundary between the self and others that cannot be crossed. An example is when people from one race or religion are only permitted to marry within their own religion or race. These restrictions are based on a dogmatic view of one group's superiority. A persistent dogma has been that women are incapable of leading in economic, religious, and political spheres. In almost every country of the world, leadership remains male-dominant. The dogma that some white Europeans are superior to all other races has been the justification for untold cruelty and exploitation in every part of the world, and humanity today is still grappling with the repercussions. Religion, as well as pseudo-spirituality, often use superstition, fear, hatred, and guilt-inducing dogmas to control and exploit. Contemporary capitalism, particularly corporate capitalism, is innately exploitative, objectifying the masses as a means for profit-making, and is full of dogma. Its bottom line is maximizing profit rather than maximizing prosperity and happiness for everyone, not just for themselves. While it is possible that these business people and entrepreneurs can make valuable contributions to society, when they have excessive wealth and influence, society is goaded increasingly towards materialism and consumerism. For these mega-capitalists, everyone and everything is objectified according to their monetary worth, not just in business, but in education, science, arts, health, sport. Everything gets brought down to a financial bottom line. People's physical, mental, and spiritual needs are often neglected, resulting in severe personal and social problems. Some of capitalism's dogmas that are promoted to achieve its goals are the private sector is more efficient than the public sector, or about capitalism there is no alternative. Also, trickle-down economic benefits everyone. Free markets are the only rational means of distribution. Free trade leaves all countries better off. So why do we continue to believe these dogmas? Why do poor people vote for politicians whose policies make them poorer? It comes back to psychic exploitation. When a lie is repeated often enough in the mass media, the truth becomes invisible. Just as physical exploitation requires force, which leads to physical battles, so psychic exploitation leads to battles of culture and language. When exploiters see that their psychic ploys are challenged, they switch strategy and try a different sentiment. Sri Sarkar refers to this as metamorphosed sentimental strategy. Consider, for example, the clash between capitalists and defenders of the environment. The word sustainable was originally intended to describe a world in which resource use was environmentally sustainable. It did not take long for businesses to describe themselves as sustainable if they continued to make a profit. Green parties now find themselves confronted with green capitalism. Greenwashing describes one kind of metamorphosed sentimental strategy, the attempt to make business as usual appear to be environmentally benign. As humanity evolves past limited geo and socio sentiments, the next sentiment defined by Sri Sarkar is humanism. Humanism is the concept that all humanity is one family. The idea of democracy is born from humanism, where power no longer rests with kings or religious rulers but belongs to the people. Organizations such as the United Nations are based in a humanist worldview. In many ways, humanism is a very expanded idea, but it still has shortcomings. Importantly, where do plants and animals and other life forms fit into the scheme of things? Humanism becomes a dogma when it cannot embrace the natural world. Remember, animals and plants do not need humans to exist, whereas humanity is dependent on the natural environment. The failure to acknowledge this basic fact of our existence has given rise to the environmental problems we face. What then comes after humanism? Sarkar's fourth and final sentiment is universalism, also called Neohumanism. By definition, universalism is not about groups because nothing is excluded. Neohumanism is the spiritual feeling of unconditional love. Love for all of creation, humans, animals, plants, the environment, everything. It is to experience one's inner spiritual self as part or expression of the one infinite self, or divine consciousness. The development of neo-humanism is a process of continually expanding the radius of one's love and benevolence, so it is not a matter of giving up love for others, but rather increasing it. It is not easy to overcome exploitation. Many political movements gain momentum from a desire to fight a particular kind of exploitation. But what happens when the target of exploitation is defeated? Quite often, the political wave of anti-exploitation sentiment that sweeps through a country ends up itself being exploitative. For example, the gulags of the Russian Revolution created even more terror for the common people than the Tsarist regime they overthrew. The recent Arab Spring revolutions left a vacuum only to be filled by other exploitative forces. It is not enough to just identify and remove the problem. A viable, benevolent solution is also needed. Sri Sarkar propounded his progressive utilization theory called Prout as a viable alternative based on universal and anti-exploitation sentiments. Positive solutions like Prout are needed as much as the removal of exploitation. Therefore, in addition to anti-exploitation sentiments, political and social movements also need to have positive, universal sentiments that arise from a deep spiritual understanding of the world. To achieve this goal, Sarkar suggests two principles called neo-ethics. The first principle is that spiritual realization should be accepted as the goal of human life. That is, to experience the feelings of oneness and interconnectivity with all things. True spiritual realization leads to a neo-humanist worldview where exploitation is impossible because the feeling of love for all beings is firmly established. The second principle is that we must strive for a balance between the different aspects of life. We need to balance our material, intellectual and spiritual pursuits, our intellect and intuition, and between emotion and rationality. In the past, some cultures have emphasized materialism over spirituality. Others have neglected the material world in the quest for religious dogma. The ideal goal is a balance between the divine and the mundane, between subjectivity and objectivity, and between individual needs and the collective good. Humanity is facing new challenges, but also new opportunities. Neo-humanism and neo-ethics present a worldview that moves us past narrow, exploitative sentiments and dogmas into an expanded society with a universal worldview where no one is left behind. Together, we can create a just and progressive society that exists for the good and happiness of all.